Last week, I had the esteemed opportunity to talk to the lead game designer behind GRAVEN. Now, this title, for those of us who don't know, is a dark fantasy RPG made by Slipgate Ironworks and developed by 3D Realms and IC Entertainment. It was a very great interview. We covered a lot of intriguing topics, and I can't wait for you to get into it. So without further ado, let's dive into the interview, shall we?
It definitely came from a fondness of the Hexen franchise, Heretic as well. When I joined, it still didn't have a whole lot of identity, and as I got more involved, influences of mine started to kind of pop up into where I drew from, essentially. Grim Dawn, definitely, a little bit of Path of Exile, so 2 action RPGs there right out the gate. Stalker, in terms of system engagement and the mood.
And so you really incorporate a bunch of the different titles kind of you grew up playing, basically, and just try to integrate some different styles and feels within the game from that sense?
In a way, I definitely do that actually in a negative sense, where I try to not emulate some of my favorite titles. Not as in, I don't want to do a good job, but rather I don't want to do things exactly the way they did because I want to give this its own unique flavor, and the way they did feature X works well for them, and kind of find their own path. I don't want a one-to-one Hexen, for example.
Yeah, you want to keep it unique in its own separate, title of itself. Yeah, I completely understand that. So kind of
unique without novelty being the goal.
Absolutely. Stemming away from that, kind of getting into the game itself, let's talk about kind of the different characters within GRAVEN, obviously touching on the main character themselves, but also the story and the puzzle aspect and everything surrounding that. I mean, I know briefly when I was looking through the different stuff about the game, I saw that there was a ton of different enemies that you face and a bunch of different characters within the title itself. So kind of tell me about all that.
Well, it certainly has a lot of enemies in it. Part of it is because it's kind of built out as a series of ecosystems. We've got a common set of enemies that you'll encounter throughout the game, and that's partially to give a familiar palette for the level designers to paint gameplay with. When they want to anchor the player back into a comfort zone, so to speak, you hit them with some of these common enemies that they've faced many times before. And so you can actually ratchet up the difficulty quite a bit there as well, because you're not dealing with the cognitive load that is unfamiliarity. But each region in the game also has its own unique set of enemies. So in the demo, I noticed that a common takeaway was, these zombies are, we're going to be fighting them throughout the game. They should behave like XYZ. People are wanting to lean back on their experiences with other games. And my immediate thought was like, well, for one thing, they're not zombies, actually. But also, they are only in the beginning of the game. You are not crawling through this one town just slaying the undead. There's not that much in the ways of undead in the game's lore.
And kind of tell me about the main character themselves. And I did see, there's a lot of different puzzle-driven parts within the game. Can you touch on that a little bit and explain just how far that goes into the progression of the story?
It's more so the puzzles are a way to get the player to be creative in the utilizing of their weapons and inventory items. It's also a mode of expression for the level designers. And some levels are going to have fewer puzzles than others simply because they're being designed by different people.
Yeah.
We don't want the same flavor everywhere. We want the level designers to have their own voice. Even, you're not going to walk into an area and see, this is a level by Chris Holden. There will be levels by Chris Holden. There already are. He's the lead level designer, by the way. I'm not just coming up with a name.
No, yeah.
And he does look uncannily like the protagonist. But that was an accident. You're not going to get that, this area is credited to this person, but we do want that area to reflect their design sensibilities, so long as in keeping with the overall goal. And as that goes to the puzzle, some people, they want to go more kind of an Indiana Jones route. Others are fans of, cryptic word phrases. Others want you to be listening carefully, so it's going to vary inherently by the level that you're in.
Okay. That's very interesting. Okay, and kind of going away from that, then you briefly were touching on the different world designs throughout the game. Just kind of give me a better vision of what the world in Graven is really going to be like. How linear based is the story, or is it much more open world with freedom to explore, kind of embracing the RPG aspect? And then kind of away from that, how long? I know it with all the exploration and circling back, could you give an estimate of how long the game would actually be?
So there is plenty of freedom to explore. It is not an open world game. You don't have your island of places to visit with mini games to play in them. It doesn't flow like that. If you just push forward, it can be a very linear game if you want it to be, because it's more so as you progress, you open up the next chapter, so to speak, to progress through. And by and large, you can keep on moving through that if you want to. You're going to be missing out on a lot of the content, a lot of the weapons, some of the spells, some of the crystals for your staff. But you can just drive forward. And I'm not going to say good luck with the final boss without getting those upgrades, because we don't want to do that power creep. I would like for the final boss to be beatable for people who just push straight forward. But I think you'll have a much more rich experience circling back, because other quests pop up when you return to an area. Some of the upgrades for weapons can change things up quite a bit, and they are expensive, so you will want to return to a location to gather resources to, frankly, just find more gold.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get more than 50% of the base game experience if you just play through it.
And then kind of the world itself, I mean, can you kind of talk to me about just the design overall of the game and how it changes as you go from beginning to end of the story?
Yeah, you start out in a swampy town that was meant to be kind of a jewel of the Empire, as it was right at the beginning of the inlet where all the trade came in to this kingdom that you are a priest of. And the swamps tend to do, they get underestimated by infrastructure, and they gradually overcome it, and problems seep in very literally sometimes, and all it takes is a stray match to really set things ablaze in a bad way, such as a plague. So you go from the swamps to you end up in the Rocky Mountains above it. I don't mean the Rocky Mountains. This isn't Earth. This is not a world where Earth exists. It's not a universe that has Earth. Put a lot of effort into the cosmology and cosmology behind that. So this is a distinct place. But essentially you move into a mountainous region. There is snow. I know every video game has the swampy area, the snowy area, and of course the desert. And we've got a desert too, because you got to have a desert. Deserts are sewers above ground. Every game has to have a sewer as well.
Okay, and moving past that, can you explain the character skills tree within the game? I know games like this, there's a lot of emphasis on upgrading your character and your weapons and all of that sort of thing. So can you kind of break down the skills tree and the different ways of leveling and ranking up?
So we don't ever clearly denote a level to the player. No experience level is tracked, and there is not a skill tree. But you can improve upon your weapons. So as you explore more, you find more weapons, more inventory items and such, and then you can make investments with merchants to improve them, to gain new flexibility, new potential. And so you grow as you explore. We do have certain items that you cannot progress without, because literally they're part of the progression. You will get them by just playing straight through the game.
So it really does kind of embrace a much more, I guess, stemming into a much more realistic kind of gritty feel within the game, kind of taking away from the skills tree and focusing on just the gameplay and interacting with the characters within it, in a sense.
I wouldn't even say realistic, just grounded.
Mm-hmm.
And I partially mean that in the mathematics sense. You're not you don't kill 20 monsters and then you've leveled up and you have 15 more health and 8 more mana and so on and so forth. It's not like in Borderlands or Grim Dawn or Path of Exile. And in saying we don't have levels, it's not a turn of phrase for the design philosophy. It isn't being tracked, and there is no concept of levels.
Okay. And then we briefly touched on the weapons, so getting much more in depth on that one. Kind of touch on the combat style within the game. I know it focuses a lot on the magic aspect, and a lot of different. I mean, from what I could see within the game, there's a bunch of different styles of weapons and ways to utilize them. So kind of touch on that, the game crafting, that sort of thing within the game itself.
I wouldn't call it crafting. It is upgrades that you can acquire for the weapons. So generally speaking, every weapon has a primary fire and an alt fire and then one upgrade. And some weapons, you do not have the alt fire immediately, because either it is an additional physical component or it is a non-intuitive skill that the character that you play has to acquire, and he gets this through training with a merchant, which is, to be frank, just another purchase. But it's a way of letting the player get introduced to something before they see the next layer of complexity with it.
Okay. And then I did notice on the Steam page for the game, it mentioned that players the environment changes by using spells and crystals. Can you kind of break that one down for me and explain what exactly that refers to within the game?
So, for example, you could have a passageway and it has igneous rock in it, which we would, to not be geologically correct, it would have some sort of visual indication. And that's just a matter of coming up with a nice shader that makes it stand out so you notice its possibility there. Mm-hmm. And when it is electrically charged, it becomes magnetic. So projectiles going down through this space will be drawn towards it when it goes past. So if they're going slow enough, it can actually pull projectiles away. If you find some sort of movable object that has igneous rock in it, well, you've got a mobile target redirector. You could tug on armored enemies with that. To go with a more elemental example, you've got the melting of ice, the burning of wooden supports, the heating of hinges to make rusted shut doors fall off. And then we've got a spell that can displace items, letting you swap a vase with a candelabra somewhere, or a monster with a different monster, they swap spots. Or a monster with thin air, where that monster then drops into an infinite pit of peril and despair.
Okay. And that really kind of helps answer my next question, because I was kind of focused around the magic and the alchemy within the game. Was there any other really major alchemy aspects or magic aspects that you would want to touch on before we move to the next question, or?
You get into the area of getting it both spoilery and also implicitly promising things that you can't 100% be confident in delivering. Mm-hmm. There are things that I want to have happen, but development it's a compromise between team members and time. Mm-hmm. And this is already a big game. We've already cut a fair bit, not things that have been publicly discussed for the most part, but just a case of the reining back, eyes being larger than our sprint velocity.
Mm-hmm. With that in mind, I guess jumping ahead to a different question, does that leave room for DLC or seasonal content, sequels? I mean, is that something you could envision after launch?
There is room for that. There are not plans for it. It's just a case of focusing on making GRAVEN right now.
Gotcha.
I have ideas for what micro DLC could be, what expansions there could be, what a sequel might look like, what a prequel might look like, and what a whole new game that isn't one of those things but takes place in the same universe could be. But My brain does that automatically. You know, it's something that I do with other people's games.
Yeah.
I do with existing games all the time, and I'll revisit them in my head as to, well, how would that game have played if I had adjusted this reload mechanic? So that's naturally happening with Graven, and sometimes it results in ideas where it's like, I think though that seems like it would be good for an expansion. Maybe we could just roll that into the base game, and then I pitch it.
Okay. And then kind of moving away from that, can you narrow down a part of the game that's your favorite? I ask every developer this just because you guys spend so much time working on these titles that I feel like it's hard not to fall in love with just so many different aspects. But is there any one thing that really popped out as being something you really fell in love with the game?
I'm trying really hard for that to not be the case. Just because so many games have their ups and downs in them in terms of particularly regions and time frames. Often it's the second act. You'll be working on a game and you start with the first act. That's what you build first. It's the beginning of the game, so you build it first and you go from there, and then you build up to the conclusion. Well, you've got to make the conclusion good, and it's going to inherently be generally better because you know your team better, you know your tools better, you have a better sense of the game's identity. And then you realize, oh, we've got 6 months until launch. First area is looking kind of weak because it was way back at the beginning. And so you go back to the beginning with your lessons learned and your new process, and you tweak and polish and improve upon it. And then generally, when it comes time to launch, the middle of the game is the middle of the game.
Okay.
And it's the one that it didn't really see that peak. It didn't see that polish, that particular bit of appreciation.
Yeah. That's a really great way of putting it. No one's actually ever explained it quite to that sense, so I like that. That's very, very interesting. And I know I'm sure you can't narrow down a specific launch date at this point, but is there any way you could kind of give me a window for when you see the game releasing, or you hope to see it release?
I don't think I'm really at liberty to talk about that. That's because that's just as much a question for 1C, our publisher.
Yeah.
But we do have everything scoped out, as in our sprints are all planned.
Okay.
The tasks are all created. So it's just a case of maintaining our velocity within those.
Okay. And then finally, last question. Just besides PC itself, what all will we be seeing Graven release on?
It will be coming to modern Xbox and PlayStation devices and the Nintendo Switch.
Okay. And finally, is there anything you kind of wanted to close out with, whether it's gameplay mechanics, different story elements, anything you really wanted to highlight?
I'm really excited about just the possibility for people to explore the way that this world unfolds itself. It's partially just coming from seeing assumptions being made regarding, oh, the magic should do this much damage. It's like, well, the magic's really not there for damage. It's there for status effects and problem solving and puzzle solving. And I do think that we did a poor job communicating that in the demo, for sure. Partially because I think it felt a little too weaponized. And it'll be better in the final release on that measure. But just the fact that people, they play a video game and they go, okay, these are the monsters I need to kill, and I'm going to push forward while killing them, and kind of assuming that standard trajectory. But solving the plague is, to make a reference to Hexen, only 1/3 of the puzzle. What caused the plague? Was it natural? Was it supernatural? What's the phenomena behind that? And I'm excited for other people going down that road of solving that, I would say a minor mystery, but just experiencing something other than just the crawl to the boss fight.
I did notice there's a ton of lore in this game. I mean, it's very, very immersive in that sense, which is very exciting to see in a video game.
There's more coming, more to the places you've already seen as well. Crexfirth, the Lice Slough, the Bry Muskeg, they will grow. They are growing, and the demo build is very out of date at this point. I'm really excited for the direction things are going in.
One last thing, just a thought that came to mind. Are there any Easter eggs within the game that players should know about? I guess you can't tell them about the Easter eggs, but are they within the title, hidden somewhere?
There's probably too many, frankly. It's something I've been concerned about before. Is it's like many, if they're not hidden well enough, it's going to give the game a jovial tone, which is not what we're making.
Yeah.
But the demo already has a dope fish. There's a house playing club music, if you know where to look and you linger long enough. I don't recall if it made it into the actual demo release or not, but I had a long-winded pun based around Diablo hidden in there. Like, there's just... It wouldn't surprise me if by launch we've got something in at least every level, and we'll probably have to do a pass of hiding them behind more complex triggers.
We covered a lot of great topics. Graven looks like it is going to be a very intriguing game, a very awesome game to get into when it arrives. I'm Nick Lanner. See y'all later. Take it easy.